You know who likes to make things complicated? Smart people, experts, specialists, people who have years or decades of experience, people who have gone super, super deep, people who are really passionate about a given topic. They like to make things complicated. You know who likes to keep things simple? Prospects, customers, especially in B2B, especially when they're approaching a project, they are hiring a certain type of specialist, a certain type of company, especially when the prospect or the customer, the person in that role who is making a buying decision is approaching this for the very first time. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know anything about your company. They probably don't know very much about your industry. They are not an extremely educated buyer. And so when you pair up that smart person, that expert, that specialist, the person with 10 years of experience who loves to make things complicated, with that prospect who's approaching something for the very first time and doesn't really know very much about this and wants to keep things simple, when you pair those two people up, what do you think happens? Not very much. Maybe a few conversations, maybe a little bit of overwhelm, but what's going to happen is a lot of roadblocks. And as someone who I consider myself a pretty smart person, I geek out over brand strategy and over market research and over the industry that I've spent the last 20 years of my life committed to. I geek out over this stuff. But when I start talking to someone who's not that deep into branding or to communication strategies or to target audience research or how to approach creative or any of the stuff that I've spent the last 20 years and my agency has spent time helping people with, when I'm at a party and I'm speaking to someone who is not in my world, I can almost watch them politely nod. I can watch their eyes glaze over. I can I can watch them kind of slowly back away and go, oh, that's interesting. Or I've had prospects even in the past where I get super excited about a new opportunity, a new strategy, something that will totally unlock growth in their business. And I go, what do you think? And they go, well, I don't quite understand it, but you seem really excited about it. And so if you're kind of a smart person like me, if you're an expert, if you spent the last years and decades dedicating yourself to an industry or to a craft, it's painful. It's painful where people with less experience, who I would consider, frankly, dumber, comes along and outsells us. But you know why they're able to do it? Because they can keep things simple. And that is what prospects, that is what customers value. You know the old saying, confused people don't say yes, confused people don't buy? Well, it's our job to make things as simple as possible and ensure that no one is confused along the way. And that is exactly what we are going to explore with today's guest, Bob Marsh. Bob has spent his career in high-growth companies, and today he is a leadership and sales expert. He's a professional speaker, and he's the Chief Revenue Officer at ImpactEleven, where he helps people bring their messages to the world. Now, there's a reason why companies like Siemens and Ford, Google, Staples, and other B2B leaders have brought Bob in to help train their teams. And I think within the first few minutes of this talk, you are going to hear why. Bob is a master at helping business owners and leaders and teams simplify their sales process. He is a master at helping people remove the roadblocks that tend to grind the customer decision-making process, the sales process. It kind of grinds it to a halt. And there are a few other reasons why you want to listen to Bob's advice. As I already mentioned, he has years of experience working with B2B leaders and sales teams, but the strategies he's developed in his work, it's also been published in Fast Company, Inc.com, and the Harvard Business Review. But most importantly, Bob Marsh is on a mission to help businesses simplify their sales process, to help them build trust with customers, and to remove the roadblocks, the obstacles that tend to make sales processes inefficient. So welcome to How to Sell More, the sales podcast for non-salespeople, where each week we give a masterclass to help ambitious B2B leaders tackle the number one challenge every business owner, every leader faces, and that is growing revenue. I am Mark Drager. Let's get into it. So, Bob, I have to ask you, you are known for the idea that you can win through simplicity. And gosh, It feels like the world is getting more complex, that business is getting more and more overwhelming, that we have to try and do so much more with so much less and fewer resources, because that's the outside expectations almost. But when we really break down business, and for everyone who's listening, we know this intuitively. If we think about our companies and our businesses, the things that work are pretty simple. The things that are complicated usually don't work. So can you help us understand what the idea of winning with simplicity is?
Yeah, you bet. So first of all, spot on what you mentioned. The world is getting more complicated by the day. There's actually more resources and more things available to us, but the challenge becomes we're easily overwhelmed by it. We're seeking oftentimes the easy button, and that rarely works. We're seeking the next silver bullet, and that rarely works either. So really, this idea of simplicity all started was when I looked back on my career, and I had a lot of success as a salesperson, executive entrepreneur. And at one time I came across, I think it was in 2010, I came across this article about a trio of economists who won the Nobel Prize in economics on something called friction theory. And I don't normally read Nobel Prize winning details. Like, for some reason, this one stood out to me.
Strange fact. Yeah. The prize in the Nobel Prize for economics is not a Nobel Prize officially. Did you know that?
Is that right? I did not know that.
Yeah, it's the only one that's actually not officially a Nobel Prize. It's something else.
Interesting. Okay, got it. All right, well, they got the Nobel Prize B. So the idea of friction theory was that contrary to traditional beliefs in economics about supply and demand, that there was this other kind of idea that friction between buyers and sellers also has an equally high impact on overall economic conditions of the world. And so when you dig into it deeper, it's not about that there's not enough supply or there aren't products that people need, or that there isn't enough kind of supply that companies can provide for them. It's that the friction that exists between the buyer and the seller is getting in the way. So as I looked at this, like, we think about friction and simplicity as like, oh, I want to have less friction in my options or in my pricing, or, trying to simplify that. But what I really realize is the friction largely exists in our heads. And when we start thinking about, like, where does the friction exist in the buyer's ability to make a decision? And oftentimes, where does the friction exist in our own minds about how we get in our own way? And so the idea of winning with simplicity is about breaking down, not just like making a hyper simple sales process, is about remembering that there's just 4 key elements that I walk through of where does friction exist in the sales process that we can easily remove just by thinking of things in a slightly different way.
That is so interesting, because I think it really depends on the situation. There are times where, yes, we 100% get in our way. We 100% make things way more complicated than they need to be because we feel it somehow makes it superior. Or it's, if it's more complicated, surely it's better.
Right.
But I've also
more expensive.
Yeah, more expensive and better. But I've also seen sometimes where people go the other way and they simplify the sales process, the marketing process. It simplifies things so quick that they're forcing a decision someone's not capable of making, that they are skipping over key parts of the process that are these emotional ahas that we're actually robbing our prospects from having. And so I'd love it if you can break this down a little bit better, so that way myself and the listeners can really understand, what should we be simplifying? What should we be removing friction from? But also, there is a bit of a psychological game here. And I think if we make things here's what we do, you want to buy it right now? We're removing a lot of the customer journey that they have to go through to naturally own the decision and the outcome.
Right. So let's take that, what you just said, and just buy this right now. That's actually creating a lot more friction. So to me, as the seller, selfishly, I'm like, if I just ask them to buy, they're going to buy or they're not going to buy. I'm going to just make this really simple. The problem is that's ignoring where the friction exists. So think of it like this. If you're a buyer, let me walk you through there's 4 different pillars of this winning with simplicity concept. The first one is something that I call noise canceling confidence. And I give you the background where that kind of term came from. But essentially the idea is to think about the friction that exists in the client's head is largely more about trust. Do I trust you as an expert? Do I trust you as a person? And that's what we're trying to break through. Now, on our side as sellers, we often have friction in our own minds of, I put the customer up on a pedestal. I think of myself as less than them. I really need this deal. There's all these things that are going in our head. I want to try to look smart. These are motivations that create complexity in the process when really all the customer wants to know is, can I trust you? And do you really know what you're talking about? Do I understand how this process is going to work? Surprisingly, some of the top performing salespeople are really good at saying, I've got all these details and nuances behind my product, but I don't need to get into all that detail with my client. I'm just trying to build trust and understand their challenges and help them work through it. And so what we find is the first pillar about what I call noise canceling confidence is that the ability to build trust from a customer comes more from us than anything else. How we carry ourselves, how we communicate, communicating with conviction, that being an actual expert at what we do. The number one reason customers don't buy from someone is because of a lack of trust. And it's not necessarily when we think about trust, like, oh, they thought you were malicious, or they thought you were going to steal from them, or like they thought you were swindling them, or what, or you're going to, charge one price and upsell later. That's not what it's about at all. When you dig into the research, what you find is the reason they didn't buy from somebody is because they didn't trust that they were an expert. They didn't trust that they really understood the customer's problem. They didn't trust how the pricing worked, how the process was going to work. It just came down to trust. So our ability to communicate with confidence and really understand what the customer needs, help them feel that we understand their challenges and that we are true experts at what we do, it elevates trust. So, I think of a little story of a client that I worked with. Salesperson's trying to close this deal. It was in the commercial office furniture space. And the customer was concerned. They said, can you guarantee this furniture is going to arrive in time for my move-in date? And the salesperson said, no, I can't guarantee that. We're going to do the best we can. So you can imagine the friction going back and forth between the customer and the customer saying, well, I have to have this. This is my job's on the line. Where the seller's like, well, I can't guarantee that. What do you want me to do? So they're going back and forth and they're not getting anywhere. And the deal's not closing, which is putting a customer in a worse position because now it's much less likely to show up and the salesperson can't close it, on and on. So it goes to his manager, talks to her about it. And she said, let me give the customer a call and see what they have to say. So she gets on the phone to the customer and she says, okay, I understand your concern. He said, yeah, this is important. This is my move-in date. And she says, all right, I've taken a look at your order. I have a high degree of confidence this is all going to arrive in time. Just let's stop there. But I can't guarantee it because here's how it works. We get the supply from somebody else, but we've gone through our whole process to make the right selections to increase the odds that it's going to be here in time. So again, I believe it's going to be here in time, but I'll tell you what, I'll keep an eye on your order every step of the way. If something falls through the cracks, I will let you know and we'll react accordingly. Sound good? Customer says, great, let's move forward. That's it. So next day later, deal's closed. Salesperson is flabbergasted. I had the same conversation with the client. The salesperson knows all these same things, but the way they communicated it was radically different. They weren't confident. They were worried about upsetting the customer. They're trying to say the right things. Then they got a little argumentative, where the only difference between the salesperson and the manager was that she walked in with conviction and confidence, and it made the customer feel better. That's all that it took. It wasn't about the knowledge or the expertise. It was about the delivery and the confidence.
What a great story.
That's a simple concept.
And what I hear in that is, and the way that I'm kind of processing it, because I think about certainty and uncertainty a lot. And so what I hear is we have to remove the uncertainty from prospects' minds. I don't have these exact stats, but by far, especially in North America, within our culture, uncertainty is something that makes people extremely uncomfortable. And at times, we as the owners, as the salespeople, as the person who's selling, we have to remove the uncertainty by taking on a little bit more responsibility or risk. In that situation, it sounds like the manager was comfortable saying listen, I've done this. I'm going to put my reputation a little bit on the line. Not guaranteeing it, but I'm saying it'll happen. And maybe if things went sideways, maybe they would short-term rent the equipment or do whatever they need to do to help make sure there's places for people to sit. But often lower level staff or new staff, I find, are very uncomfortable putting their name, putting their reputation, putting the responsibility, the onus on them, and they try to dodge it almost. And it creates more uncertainty, does it not?
Unnecessary friction. Right. That's kind of how I put it. Yeah, you're 100% right. So did you say that your audience is largely made up of business owners? Is that
Yeah,
right?
typically business owners, or listen, we're entrepreneurs, or the teams that work for them.
Yeah. Right. So I think that you're right. I think that experienced people are more comfortable with a level of uncertainty and are willing to because they understand how people make decisions. Like, it's okay for me to realize, like, yeah, I mean, is there some risk that something's not going to happen? Sure, there could be a natural disaster, there could be some crazy thing that happens, like, but as long as I believe that you have my best interest in mind, that's what I want to know. And that's what makes me feel comfortable. That's kind of what that story is about. Now, the reason I asked I want to make sure I understand your audience is, another one of the ways that we can build more of that trust and that removing that uncertainty we talked about is that oftentimes we see a salesperson has got this relationship with a customer, and then the customer needs to go to somebody else to get approvals and move up the line. Now, one of the things that salespeople often do is like, oh, I got to get to the decision maker, right? It's like one of the oldest kind of things in the kind of sales books you find. You got to get to the decision maker, which isn't
right. I think I have that book somewhere.
Veto, yeah, veto. Very right, exactly. Got to get the veto. So, and it is important. You need to understand that, but there's sometimes a reality where like the day-to-day person is just that's their responsibility to kind of figure out what needs to happen. So what happens is there's uncertainty that the client has. Is this the right choice? Is that the right company for me to select? I know that, Johnny is kind of leading the effort, et cetera, but did he make the right choice? So one of the suggestions that I give people is to do a little move that I call the CEO fist bump. So it could be so here's the way that this works. So going to the core concept that there's uncertainty at the level of the customer, and am I making the right choice? Am I buying from the right company? Do they have my back, et cetera? So if we believe and understand that's a friction point, the decision maker believing this is the right choice, how can we address that? The CEO fist bump, the way that it works, is that a salesperson talks to the day-to-day person, sees like, okay, I think that there's a match here, what the customer needs matches what we do. And I learned this because when I was running my own technology company, I was the founder and the CEO, is that I would have one day, one of my salespeople came to me and said, hey, would you mind sending an email? I can't go around my day-to-day contact, but why don't you send an email to the VP of sales at this company that I'm trying to sell into? We sold into sales organizations, and just kind of make the connection. I thought, all right, that's a cool idea. So I just sent an email to the VP of sales. I said, hey, John, I'm introducing myself. I'm the founder and CEO of Level 11. Someone on your team, Marjorie, she's been talking to Brendan and our team. By the way, Marjorie's really sharp. Brendan's been very impressed with her. Good hire there. They had a great conversation. I just want to reach out and introduce myself. What Brendan explained to me, it sounds like this is a bullseye use case for us. I'm really excited about it. No need to get back to me because Marjorie's in great hands with Brendan, but I just want to let you know I'm here if you have any questions or I can help in any way. Thanks a lot. That's it. That single move we did over and over and over again drove more sales than any other single thing that we did in our process. And you think about, well, why would that be? Because we removed that uncertainty that the customer had. That senior level person who we couldn't get to by trying to go around the day-to-day contact, I could do it. The salesperson could say like, oh, our crazy CEO, I can't control that guy. He'll do whatever he wants. Never happened. No one ever got upset because I just complimented their employee, and they're not going to get upset because I just paid him a big compliment. So two things would happen when I did that, when I would send those emails. One, all of a sudden, within a couple of days, Marjorie would get back to Brendan and say, hey, our VP really likes this, got a nice note from your CEO, feels really good about it, let's move forward. Or I would get a response from the VP within 10 minutes. Thank you so much for reaching out. This sounds really great. Let's jump on a call and get connected for a few minutes. We would have a very simple conversation, build a relationship, build some trust, and all of a sudden it all flowed down and is a fantastic way to kind of make things happen. So a simple little tactic, but it goes to the core of what we're talking about. Where does the friction exist in the sales process? Where does the friction exist in the customer's willingness or hesitation to make a purchase? And you start thinking, where are the friction points? Then you start figuring out what are the different ways that I can remove it. CEO fist bump is one of those ways.
That is an amazing strategy. My goodness. When we used to do corporate overviews, let's call them, corporate promotions, corporate overviews, often we would do very authentic driven storytelling. And if we're taking a company, we might have a few people from the engineering team or the operations team or the service team or the delivery team. Then we'd have maybe people who are in charge of R&D or business development or the leadership, right? You'd want the different perspectives of the different people from the different teams to show that this company is well represented and could cover the vision, the impact, the details, what have you. We would cover everything. And as we would work through the different people, the different personalities, perspectives, and roles, often some people would want to talk about everything. And we would almost gate it. We would almost say, like, well, listen, from the viewer's perspective, from the audience perspective, you can speak about these pieces or areas, but we have to save some of those other pieces or areas for someone who's a more, let's say, a leadership role, or someone who's more of a subject matter expert. And we would almost create these perspectives and characters and gate stuff. So that way, when the audience sees someone coming in, and another way to explain this is, if we don't want to show someone, quote unquote, selling or pitching, we need someone who is in a selling or pitching role to do the selling and pitching. So that way the subject matter expert could come in and just look like a credible expert. And we would carefully kind of control the different characters in this play, let's say, so that way the audience never bumps up against, oh, I thought you were an expert, but now you're selling me something, you're pitching me something. That's uncomfortable. And what I hear you saying is allow the sales team to sell, allow the sales team to scope, allow the work to happen at the team level, but you coming in at the leader level, leader to leader, and not getting pulled into the weeds, not tarnishing, and you starting to sell everything. It allows each role to play a key part in this connection and dance, while also then allowing the other people to do what they do best.
And feel good about it. So really all I was doing was opening the line of communication. That's the only thing that was happening. I opened the line of communication to that more senior level leader, which maybe half the time we would start communicating with each other. But simply having that access makes that customer feel more comfortable to say, none of the other company CEOs reached out to me. I don't have direct access to any senior person over there. All of a sudden, like, that VP of sales becomes more supportive, and certainly in a tiebreaker situation, we're more likely to win. But you're right, and that's a great insight, is that also that approach doesn't try to say, hey, I'm going to take this over, which then diminishes, in this case, Brendan or the salesperson on my team's ability to do their job. Also, we're not doing the same thing to Marjorie on the other side. We're actually complimenting both of them, saying they're wonderful, they're great. But hey, if anything doesn't sound right, let me know. And by the way, I'll do the same thing. So opening that line of communication becomes so powerful in the moment, but also you may need to tap into it later. So if I did that open line of communication early in the sales process, hey, I just heard you guys, they got off the phone together. I just happened to hear this in the hallway. Oh my gosh, this is so perfect for us. Like, great. Well, now later in the process, it becomes a lot easier for me to say, hey, I heard we're the goal line. I heard you're kind of trying to decide between the two. What can I do to make sure this happens? Or, hey, I heard things are going sideways. Or maybe they become a customer, then we have an issue. All of a sudden, I'm not just showing up out of nowhere. We've already connected before. So you're right. It's like, let the people do their work, and it's just kind of removing that element of friction, hesitation, concern that exists.
And so you mentioned
often we just ignore and hope is going to go well.
There's all areas of our business and life we just hope work out. You mentioned that there are 4 main areas of friction that we really look at when we're working through the winning with simplicity approach. What are some of the other areas that friction exists that we may not be aware of, and how can we remove that?
So I go through all these in a 1-hour keynote, go really deep on all of them. So I'll hit them at a high level. So first one is, as I mentioned, noise canceling confidence. The idea that we need to carry ourselves with more confidence because that helps exhibit trust to the customer, helps them kind of feel more trustworthy of you. And that's kind of really at the core of it. So it's about trust through confidence. The second is something I called building third layer connections. And the idea here is, again, as a quick summary, is that I've observed over the course of my career and working with literally thousands of salespeople that the majority, or not many of them stay at the surface, or what I call the first layer. Simple conversation, you ask them a question they can answer. They're almost like the person at the cocktail party that is asking questions, but they're looking around like who else is there to talk to, like not truly deeply engaged. First layer, we don't want to be there. But hey, we have a bad day, difficult customer, it's easy for it to happen. The second layer is where probably 80% of all salespeople exist. Ask good questions, very personable, Customer tells them what they want. They'll put together a great solution. They know how to compare to their competitors. Great. Build a nice career. But there's others that get to the third layer where you're deeply understand the customer's goals, their fears. You're asking them questions that they're like, geez, I never thought about that before. When you start challenging them on their business and challenging them the way that they're thinking, maybe they come to you and say, hey, this is what I'd like to implement for my business. Then you say, that's not the right solution. Like, we're not for you, or I want to step back and let you think about something a little bit differently. Third layer connections are about really building that deep connection that most people don't. The third one is something I call lead the journey. And essentially, it's the way I like to summarize it is to stop thinking of sales as something that we do to somebody, and start thinking of it as an act of service where we're helping others make the right decisions for themselves. So the idea here is that as a salesperson, my role is to deeply understand the customer's goals, fears, objectives, whatever it might be, share what our services are and how we can help them, and then look for all those friction points and how do I make it easier for them to make the right choice. Is that my job is not to manipulate, to persuade. It's to just simply understand what are their concerns, what are their hesitations, so that we can address them together. Like the most common one people come across is price. So it's too expensive. Well, let's dig into that. Why do you think that? What would make it work? So the point is, how do we think of it as I'm helping someone make the right decision? I'm trying to uncover where their hesitations are so that I can remove friction and simplify that experience, walk them through the journey. And I get in deep on things like how to use options effectively, and the importance of using options to make the customer feel more in control because it helps them make the decision the right way. Too many options is too confusing. Too few options make a single option aversion. People it might be the right solution, but they don't feel in control, and then you delay. So we get into all that kind of thing. It's about lead the journey, help the customer make the right decisions for themselves. And the fourth pillar is all about something I call optimize your impact. And so it's a way to kind of rethink of, I never love the idea of time management because it's going to imply it's like, how do I just get more stuff done? How do I cross more things off my to-do list? I like to think of it more as, how do I maximize my impact? Like, what are the gifts that I bring to the world? What are the actions and things that I need to do that would bring me the most joy, satisfaction, results, and impact in the world, and make sure that I'm kind of allocating more of my time there. So when you think about what activities will drive more impact and focus on that is more important than how much can I get done in a single given day. So a simple common example is salespeople will often admit, I don't spend enough time prospecting. Well, if you think that's going to have a massive impact in your business, then let's make sure to carve out time to make sure that it gets done. So it's all about maximizing your impact.
So now, listeners, you can tell this is why I wanted to have Bob on, because these are amazing frameworks. And you can also hear why he's spoken on stages with Google and Staples and HubSpot and major car manufacturers and major technology companies and your own background. This is fantastic. And if you want to dig deeper, of course, we're going to have all of the links towards the end of the show and in the show notes. Bob, I really want to thank you for sharing this. I do have one last question for you. It's what I like to end my interviews with, because I feel like I'm going to really put you on the spot here now. So if you had to give us one tip or one single strategy to help us sell more, what would that be?
I think it's that concept that I talked about earlier, is to think about carefully, where does friction exist with this person that I'm talking to? Like, where is their hesitation? And you might need to make some of your own assumptions and trust yourself. So if they're a new customer, they're probably really where it's about is, do I trust that this company is credible? Like, do they really understand my issues? So to think of it, don't think of like objections and overcoming objections and getting the decision maker. Not that those things aren't important, but to just reframe the world of selling as, I'm looking for friction points so that I can smooth those out. That's my role. And when I smooth out those friction points, it allows the customer to make decisions a lot more easily and more confidently. That's all I'm trying to do. I can't make someone buy anything, but I can help them make decisions faster and more easily, which of course will be in my favor as well.
That was the conversation that I had with Bob Marsh. Now, to wrap up, I'm going to share my 3 biggest takeaways from this talk. Number 1, Friction kills sales. You have to remove friction from the sales process, and that's often in the customer's mind. It's the uncertainty about your credibility, about your products, or the overall decision-making process. So you need to identify these different friction points and smooth out your sales process. Number 2, the CEO fist bump strategy. Sometimes CEOs need to sell to CEOs, leaders to leaders, managers to managers, and being able to just kind of drop in, being able to say, hey, I'm here if you need me. I love this approach. So if you are a leader, do not be afraid to jump in, to say hi, to let the prospect know that you are there, and they can always reach out to you. They can always contact you. You are available at any point. And of course, number 3, sales is not about sales, it's about an act of service. So viewing your role as a service rather than trying to manipulate the process to try and just get the close, get the sale, being able to come in, serve the customer, serve the client, serve the project need, putting their needs first in the long run, overwhelmingly will help you build stronger relationships, a stronger reputation, more referrals, more repeat business. At the end of the day, sales is about service. So there you have it. Those were my 3 biggest takeaways from this talk, but I'm curious, what were yours? Did anything challenge your perspective? Let's dive deeper into the conversation over on LinkedIn. That's where I share more insights, more thoughts, and I tend to spark a conversation over there. Again, my name is Mark Drager, and you can find my contact details in the episode show notes. Now, while you're over on LinkedIn, be sure to follow Bob Marsh for more strategic tips and tricks and content. You can also check out his website, meetbobmarsh.com. And one last thing, if you've made it this far into the show, you really should subscribe. And here's why. Obviously, you're an ambitious B2B leader. Obviously, you're hungry for more growth, for more strategies. You want to hear from the best of the best. And if that isn't enough, then I don't know what else to say. I'm a nice guy. Either way, I am Mark Drager, and I will catch you in the next episode.